What was it about this project that you were just like, yes, I want it?
Oh man, okay. Well, I think first of all, I've been a fan of Bear's music since. This is going to make him feel terrible, but since I was in high school, like I was little.
We'll make sure to tell him you said that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he'll kill me. Yeah, it was like Battlestar Galactica. I think it was like early high school for me, and loved it. And have been following his work ever since. Kyle, I'm friends with, has known Bear for a while as well, so I got to meet him personally a little before this. So when he said he wanted to do a comic, and Kyle recommended me, I was like, absolutely. But then speaking with Bear about it, he's such a generous collaborator and was so open. Like the album. And the tracks of the album obviously had very clear themes, but in terms of the structure of it, he was very open to whatever we wanted to do. So yeah, I was on board pretty much immediately. And then when we cracked this idea of different universes for each chapter of the book, meaning we could bring in different artists, that was the most exciting thing because it meant we could bring in so many different talented artists and like people that I'm close to personally, the people I'd never met and have been fans of forever, and get them all to jam on it. It sort of made the comic match the album in that way because the album has so many fantastic like guest people on it. Doing the same thing with the comic, it's like, yeah, that's gonna rock, and it did. I had a blast. Yeah, it was great.
So this is an amazing project, mania project, and it has so much creativity jam-packed into it. There's so many places that you go with it. With so much freedom, in a sense, what do you think is the biggest hurdle that kind of got in the way? And sometimes, I think Ramon was just telling us, sometimes you need those 10 pedals to kind of guide you. But
absolutely.
But in this case, I'm curious about that experience.
I think the boundless scope of the album in some ways created its own limitations because we knew we wanted to represent the entirety of the album, and it's so diverse. Like there's such different tones and emotions in it. Realizing that we wanted to hit all of those meant we're going to be jumping around a fair bit by nature, right? And we need to be moving quite fast. If we wanted to represent the whole album because of comic pages, it was going to be pretty brief. It would be like bang, 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 which in some ways have created the structure of the story. So those restrictions ended up forming the backbone of the story. And then it was up to us to sort of find the heart of it. Because we arrived pretty early at this idea of someone being born into different universes and experiencing them because that would allow us to sort of walk through all of the universes. But then figuring out the why of it, the heart of the story. I think it was like Bear and I were on a Zoom. I was in Australia, so it was like 4 a.m. my time or something. I was so out of it, and we'd been going on for hours. But we arrived at this point of it really being a story about parenthood, about like living your entire life and weighing up all of the pain and the joy and the beauty of the experience, and realizing you can't really put that on any sort of objective scale and figure it out, but you kind of have to do if you want to decide to bring life into it, right? Like that is an incredibly difficult and important decision. And how do you do that if you're a person? That's really difficult. How do you do that if you are the universe? You have to decide if life is to continue with all of the pain and beauty that comes with that. What's that process like? And then people talk about like live that process, go on the journey and find out for yourself.
Well, speaking of pain, and one of the themes in the story, what lessons do you think loss can teach us?
That is an excellent question. I mean, I think what I really came to appreciate through writing the book was that loss is life, right? Like those things are intractable. And it's not a novel idea, but loss framing your life and teaching you what was important. Like you don't really appreciate what you had until it was gone, and you don't appreciate the most meaningful things until they're no longer available to you. And having one being experienced that over and over and over again, and having reinforced over and over again just how beautiful life can be and how hard it can be, like experiencing the most extreme version of that became the sort of core of the book. So yeah, I mean, it really is. I knew we were onto something when I sent the final script to our letterer, and she's like, "Oh, I couldn't finish lettering the book today. I was crying too much at the end." And I was like, "Yes, I did it. I'm an evil genius." That I knew that we were handling the subject appropriately when we had that reaction from our sort of first audience.
So I had a question that I really hope does not sound like a gotcha, but I want to preface, no one else is really doing work like this, and I think it's so incredible. It is a multiverse story.
Yes.
And that's very prevalent today.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm wondering, one, is there something in the water that's making us also drawn to
I
the
got
stories?
Rufus Wayne right here. Everybody knows who that is?
Sick it.
You came forward. We're going to shoot some still pictures right now for just a minute. So if you want to come over, come on over.
Okay, to recap. And what?
Multiverse stories, something in the water.
Why do you think we're so drawn to those stories, and what makes the multiverse lens the perfect fit for this album and story?
Yeah, I think that people's conceptions of what a story can be have been really broadened recently, right? Like, I feel like the ability for audiences to handle pretty complex ideas has expanded greatly, and the idea of a multiverse is a very useful construct for examining different variants of experiences. And I feel like in a lot of ways it came from comics, because comics inherently you get to see worlds through the eyes of different artists every time, right? So in some ways you're experiencing a different version of the world every time you read a different comic, and that became a very easy and frankly inexpensive way to do it in comics initially, right? Very hard to do on film, easy to do in comics, and then as that literacy built in the sort of audience community, that made its way to films, and I think in films they found how useful it could be. I think it can also be a bit of a cop-out in storytelling wise. It can remove stakes, but if you handle it correctly, it can also be a very beautiful way of reflecting on existence. I think about like Everything Everywhere All at Once is very similar and like incredibly expansive, but it's about a very personal human story. And if you're using it for that human lens, I think it can be really beneficial. And that was our kind of guiding ethos in a lot of ways. It was like, we want to make sure that as we're doing this, it is a story about one person and their very human experience. And the multiverse angle on it is just how we're exploring this idea in a way that kind of comics can only really do. Like, it is that incredibly expansive canvas. And if we can do both of those things, then it will be worth using that concept, even if it is very popular at the moment.
What? Oh, no, you're good. See, what part of this process for you was just surprisingly smooth?
Surprisingly smooth. I think definitely working with Bear. Like, like I had met him in passing before, but I had never collaborated with him, right? And he's a very famous guy, and you never really know how that's going to go, right? And I'm not a famous guy, so. But Bear was always so generous, and like it was, treated me as an equal, and we just gelled really, really well, which you can't take for granted. I've had other experiences that aren't necessarily just like that, so I was very grateful for it. That went very, very smooth.
So what was the most challenging part of this multiverse stories? There's so much going on and there's so much to tie together.
Yeah.
So what was the most challenging aspect of making sure that everything was cohesive in the end and made sense?
Definitely, and thankfully this is what Kyle's job and my job. Managing the artists, like everyone is incredible, and fantastic to work with, but getting 18 people to find a cohesive vision, and although they're all expressing themselves in different ways, we needed to have, we opened each chapter with the same framing panels, sort of orientate people, so making sure that there was this consistency across the book, so it didn't feel incoherent, it just felt expansive. That was difficult. And then the schedules of 18 different people. Some of them are incredibly busy and get it for Bear McCreary. I'll do it at midnight after I finish my day job, which is great. We're very appreciative for it. But it meant there was a lot of emails, a lot of calendars, a lot of freaking out about who's going to get it on time. We did it! Yay!
So I asked Kyle, I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
What are you most excited for about this project for the masses to experience?
I mean, for me personally, probably just experiencing the different artists, because there are some big heavy hitters on there, and then there are some people that are pretty relatively new, and having that be a vehicle like bringing all of Bear's fans over, introducing some people to comics at all, which would be great. And we wanted to make it accessible in that way. But then introducing them to all of these incredible artists. And if people find artists they're like huge fans of, and then that builds their careers and their community, then that's really exciting. So I hope that people find their way to new artists and find some new favorites as part of this big journey that we're going on.
Are there, because this is like a big multimedia enterprise, are there other multimedia projects that you sort of look to be like, this is not quite inspiration, but just sort of to see how that was approached?
Yeah, not really, weirdly. Maybe we should have. I think there was no one had really done quite, as far as I know, what we were trying to do in terms of tying the comic and the album together so closely. So really, rather than look out, we just made sure that we were in close collaboration connection with each other constantly. Like, I heard the album very early on in its conception. Bear was involved in every stage of the process, and it was just about us coming back to each other constantly. And I describe it, see how sometimes they build bridges on each side and kind of meet in the middle? Yeah. We did that. And then we got to the middle, oh, thank God, it fits. Let's go together. And it only fit because we kept checking back with each other and making sure that they kept integrating back together. And I think if we didn't do that, if Bear wasn't such a generous and consistent collaborator, it very well could have been a disaster. And I'm glad it wasn't. I'm glad it ended up where we ended up.
We heard earlier that not only did the album influence the graphic novel, of course, but it also went the other way around, and it kind of all built on each other. Can you tell us a bit about that process and the decisions that were made to make that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was a surprising part for me because I expected it to be more one way, and it definitely, for the most part, it was, right? The album, as much as it was unfinished, did come first, and we were kind of responding to that, but Bear was so involved in the process and was clearly energized by it that some of it did find its way in. I think the most direct way is there were some monologues in the book that Bear responded to and felt evoked the themes of the album so well that he wanted to have them on the album. So he took them to friends of his, like Lee Pace and Mat Groom, and said, hey, could you record these and we'll put them on the album? And then he wrote music to go to those monologues. And that meant that stuff that I had written was performed by Mat Groom with music by Bear McCreary. And I think I still really process that,
Hasn't clicked yet.
No, I think in a couple of years I'll sit right up in bed whoa, hang on. Did that happen? It was incredible. And I feel incredibly privileged and fortunate. And then I think in some small ways, Bear was seeing art come in as he was finishing the album, and I'm sure in some way that influenced the tone of the music, but to what extent, I'm not sure. Yeah.
So given that this was a unique experience in terms of the multimedia storytelling, could you tell us a little bit more about how you approached this project as a writer, because it was so unique and different?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing was making sure that I saw myself as very much a conduit between Bear and the album and the artists. So I wanted to give people structure and a thematic cohesion, but also make sure I was giving space for the artists to express themselves and bring their soul to it, as much as Bear brought his to the album. And I think a lot of that is just explaining to the artist what the core pillars were that were sort of immutable, but also where there was flexibility. There was a lot of flexibility. So I would often, in writing the scripts, you'd normally lay out panel 1, panel 2, panel 3. I would do that, but explain this is one way the story could go, but you understand it. We know that you understand this chunk of the story. You express it in the way that you want to, and we'll rewrite the script. I'll rewrite the dialogue to your art if necessary to make sure that you are communicating it through your lens, because we came to you for your style. Even going to them as artists and saying this is a very expensive creative project. Take the wheels off, just go out there as far as you can. There's no style too weird. We want it specifically to be the most creative thing we've ever done. And they lived up to that. They came back absolutely. I've been waiting for that chance to sort of take the limiters off and go crazy. And so they did. And it felt good.
Since there are so many eras that this the story hops through.
Yeah.
to cover every track, and because it's on a multiversal scale. Were there any arcs or pieces of the story that just felt like the biggest hurdle? Felt like the part that just couldn't quite fit until the very end?
Yeah, I think there was some challenges we knew going in that we weren't going to be able to cover each track of the album in the same amount of detail, just because of the amount of space that we had. So figuring out like what were core pillars versus what were moments that we would pass through and kind of experience those emotions in almost like a roller coaster way, like you hit it and then you're out again, straight into the next world. And the album did shift around a little bit in its later stages, which made the story shift around a little bit, which was some mechanical work for me, sort of restructuring things a little bit. So that was a little difficult, but there again, like Bear was so open about everything, and I knew decisions pretty far ahead of time that were coming down the pipe. So yeah, that was difficult but good. Yeah, I think that was probably like one of the bigger challenges, and then yeah, that cohesiveness as well. I think was finding out how to communicate that cohesiveness and like where to do it without imposing problematic limitations to the creativity of our artist partners. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the balance we struck with that.
So ultimately, it's nothing compared to balancing 18 calendars.
That part, yes. That's why Kyle does his job and I do my job. I would be really bad at that. He's got
balanced, or barely.
Yeah, 100%. Like he's got that director brain. Like he's very good at coordinating a million different people with different skill sets. And I'm very thankful for him.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you had to sometimes make adjustments for like artists and like on the script. Were there a lot of those, or did it somehow just kind of like all fall in together? Like
it was surprisingly cohesive, and I think because we were very clear about that freedom up front, we didn't need to push anyone to be like, "Oh, no, go harder."
kind of like an open escape.
100%. People like came back with their visions, and then we were able to chase that and make sure that we were, really like fitting the story around their creativity. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.